Disclaimer, trigger warning. The We Are One podcast aims to shed light on the abuse experience within the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. The stories shared are from survivors who bravely recount their personal experiences. It is important to note that unless an abuser has been convicted in a court of law, they are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The podcast does not serve as a legal judgment, but rather is a platform for survivors to share their truth. Welcome to the We Are One podcast. Let's jump right into today's episode. Here's your hosts, Olivia and Jennifer.
Welcome back to the We Are One podcast. I'm your host, Olivia.
And I'm Jen.
And on today's episode, I'm really excited about this next one just because we've had pastors come on before on season 1, Pastor James and Pastor Brent. And it's kind of ironic how social media works. It's really negative, but also positive, because then we get to meet people like John that will be coming on, and it's a small world because we know quite a few people and we have an age gap. So it's just funny how the IFB is a very small but like big world. Like when you're in it, you're like, oh yeah, I know, blah blah blah, and then you look at it, it's like a huge world, but it's really small because everybody knows everybody or tied in with someone. So hello, John.
Hello, how are you?
Jen.
Oh, good.
Good. How are you?
Good.
Well, thank you so much. So how did you get into the IFB?
I was born into it. My dad and mom are both first generation Christians, the mountains of Northeast Georgia. They both grew up in, for the time and area, fairly rough situations, but my dad's dad was a World War II vet, so with all the issues that came with that a lot of times. So my dad and mom got saved at early ages, around 18, I think was when my dad got saved. But and then he felt called to preach. So back then, the place to go was Tennessee Temple, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so they went there mid 70s rather. I was born in 79 while they were still there. And then when he graduated with his bachelor's, he was called to a little church down in Northeast Alabama, and that's where I grew up.
Okay. So, how long were you at that church? Was it like basically your whole upbringing was at that church and then you went to college, or?
No, that was his first church. I think I was 4 when we moved to Alabama, and he was at that little church for, I think, about a year and a half. And there were just some issues there that he just resigned. It wasn't anything he was doing or anything. It was just some disagreements with some deacons and people like that. And so he didn't want to drag his family or other people through all that. So he resigned there. We moved a few miles away and then attended a little church there close to where we lived for a little while. And then another church called him then. I think I was 6 or 7. I think I was 7. And then he's been there ever since. He's been there now for 38 years, something like that. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
yeah.
So he's still pastoring.
Yes. He's still pastoring in Alabama. Yep.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. So is his church an IFB church, or?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. So then, after you guys were at that church, then you know, high school, then college, and did you attend a Bible college anywhere, or?
I did. Of course, I grew up in that church, and the house they moved to when I was 7, they're actually just now moving out of. He bought a house, so they're but I grew up in that house at that church. And then when I was 18, I graduated high school a little bit early, about a year early, and then worked for like a year or so. And then I went to Crown College in Powell, Tennessee, just outside Knoxville. And I was there for my 4-year degree. I met Jill there. We got married while we were there. And but yeah, Crown is where I went to went to college. Clarence Sexton, the founder of that college, was under Lee Roberson at Tennessee Temple years before. So my dad knew Clarence Sexton from there. So it worked
Okay.
out, as far as kind of a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk about what it was like to have your father as an IFB pastor? Like, I've talked to quite a few PK kids. Jen is one herself. And, just the difference with even just, I mean, obviously, I think in IFB, it's just different for girls. But I'm curious for you, how was it like, growing up as a pastor's son? Like, what was it like?
In some ways, it sucked, honestly. People assume, people sort of assume, oh, you must have it, because the people in my dad's church love my dad, and so people assume because he's a good man, he's a lot of integrity on a personal level, but so people kind of assume that you have a great life because your dad is, he's not he doesn't have a drinking problem, he doesn't have this problem or that problem or whatever, it doesn't, so people assume that it's easy and that it's great. But it really isn't always great, because you have very high expectations sometimes even unreasonable ones. And thankfully now my dad was never really into all the politics of a lot of the IFB situation. He really didn't care who liked him or who didn't. Thankfully, I kind of got that from him. But as far as, there was still some of that still bled through, in that the IFB movement is just it's very big on, if not built on, fear and like almost a superstitious view of a lot of things. And we weren't exempt from that. And I think he still felt a lot of pressure for his children to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way, dress a certain way, talk a certain way. And so obviously there were some conflicts there from time to time, but I'm thankful we weren't deeper into like the really, like my dad thankfully would not have covered up something perverted that happened in the church. I think he'd have dealt with it. I don't think he would have covered it. Which is what's going on a lot in the IFB today, obviously. And so there was some good, and there were some very, very sometimes bad things as well, but I'm thankful for the good anyway,
Yeah.
I can
And I mean,
definitely relate. Yeah.
yeah, and I know people who are PK kids, and I've talked to quite a few people who are males, and they're like, the pressure of being in the ministry alone. It's like, oh, because my father was a pastor, I had to be a pastor, like that pressure. So did you ever feel that pressure to be in the ministry? Like, because a lot of IFB parents in general, like, not, they don't even have to be a pastor or even a deacon or any of that. Just the pressure of having to go to Bible college is like the big thing. So I'm curious for you, did your dad kind of have your future mapped out for you, or was it like just you felt like to do it?
There were certain pressures from him in certain areas, as far as very much on I think most of the pressure that I and my siblings experience. I have an older sister and a younger brother and sister. And I think we all felt this. We've talked about it. I mean, we all felt that, as far as the pressure of maintaining their standards into adulthood, passing these things to our children. That thing was definitely like mapped out as far as what was wanted. I would have to say he did want me to go to Crown or go somewhere. He didn't pressure me to go to Crown. He wanted me to go somewhere for at least a year, which I was fine with at the time. I really didn't mind it. I, looked forward to it to some degree, but now the decision to stay the 4 years was mine, because I felt like I should at the time. But I'd say there were definitely some pressures there, but it was more to do with public, and I say this with quotations, but public testimony that was more of the almost obsessive at times, expectations and pressures, but thankfully not as much as far as my overall life. As far as if I had chosen to just be a carpenter, which I am a carpenter now, as well as I'm bivocational, but he's bivocational. He's a machinist and as well as a pastor, and he's always liked it that way. So there wasn't a lot of pressure for me to go into full-time ministry or anything like that. That's another thing I'm glad that he really didn't get crazy about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, it's crazy when the IFB, like, that mindset, like if you're not in the ministry, like, or if you are in the ministry, you can't have another job situation. It's just like, I don't know.
Well,
I look at it like there's more opportunities to witness to someone, like, you know what I mean?
no,
Like, like my mom does hair, and like she said, I can't, how many times, our just Jesus gets brought up or whatever. Like that's witnessing to someone. You don't have to be in the ministry.
and
And
it's more effective, really.
mhm, yeah,
Long, yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about your high school years? Like what was because you said like your dad wasn't, I mean your dad is an IFB pastor, but from what I'm getting, he wasn't like the extremist that we have seen, throughout the
Right.
years. Can you talk a little bit about like what your dad did for like the youth and stuff like that? Like how was that growing up for you?
Almost there was very little of that. The church was very small when he got there, and it's way out in the country. So it's never been a lot. But I will say this without trying to put my dad down or anything. But he he seemed almost so much. I think he got turned off to some degree, even at Tennessee Temple, with some of the extreme hype kind of things that goes on with bus ministries and those kind of things. Um, Not to the extent of like a Hiles. It wasn't quite there, but I think he got sort of turned off to some of that. And so he's kind of an enigma because in most of the ways that you normally think a lot of IFE preachers are, he really isn't concerned with a lot of those things. His main thing was mainly, it was almost like his hang up is really still to some degree more of just this almost an irrational fear of small little things that you would think, like, well, you have an IFB background, and so does Jen, but it seems like, but as far as there's just a lot of that, just the fear of slippery slopes. I mean, it's always this, everything's a slippery slope, and so I know I'm kind of getting sidetracked from your question,
No, it's good.
but so there was good and bad as far as in that particular regard. He didn't have some of the issues that are common in the IFB, but he had a few of his own kind of things that were, and it was more based on expectations, sort of the fear of getting off track somehow, as if God has just left it completely up to us. But
Right. I can totally relate to just a lot of what you're saying. My dad wasn't like your typical IFB pastor either. Like as a girl growing up in the IFB, it wasn't, my parents that were, enforcing you can't wear pants, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was the actual church members who were pressuring my parents to make sure that I wasn't doing that or my mom wasn't wearing pants. And my mom actually, she had a secular job, and a lot of people in the church had a problem with that. Like, why is the pastor's wife working? But they loved the fact that he paid for the health benefits and the church didn't have to pay for the health benefits. So it
right,
was like, well, you can't have it both ways. So either my mom works or she doesn't work and you guys pay for the health insurance. Like
right,
it just always came up in business meetings and stuff. And it just seemed to be like that was like the big thing. And so I can totally relate to what you're saying. And I know what you're saying too, in the sense that like your dad was really an enigma within the IFB, but also like there were things that maybe you felt, I know with my dad, there were things me and my brother felt like my dad should put his foot down on and not care what some of these other people thought. Like he didn't care, but he did care at the same time because you're still in that circle.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so it was like, he definitely wasn't legalistic, but a lot of the members in his church were very legalistic. And, my dad's thing was just basically like, well, it's really not a big deal if you can't wear pants at church. Like, just not a big deal. Like, you can on vacation, you can at home, like, whatever, just do it for church. And it became kind of like that. And then I was always very like, I question everything, especially when things don't make sense. So I was like, people would say, well, like our youth pastor and Olivia, you actually brought this up recently in an episode where it's like, oh, you can't go to the movies because if somebody drives by and sees you coming out of the theater, they don't know what movie you went to see. And it's
Right.
like,
I've heard that.
okay, well, there's only like a handful of movies you can see at a movie theater, and the worst of them are rated R. But you, however, can sit in your own home and watch X-rated movies and nobody
Right.
knows about it. So,
Right.
and you come to find out that the people like that are the ones with that kind of a problem. And yeah, it's just it was kind of weird because my parents just weren't like your typical IFB. So in that sense, we're really blessed. I mean, really truly,
Right.
because I know a lot of people who do come from very strict IFB pastors home and they are like complete atheists now. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
And my
interesting.
dad, my dad was very big on the standards part.
Mm.
As far as the women, dressing and the way women dress and all this, and looking back, it's wild even thinking about that stuff. Um, but yeah, now like my brother and I, he'd tell us, he's like, you gotta go, you gotta, weed the garden, this today while I'm gone or whatever. And then, so we're out there with tools, weeding the garden and all this. And like, if he found out that we were out there with our shirts off, then that was, we were basically just headed for hell. He was big on that stuff, but once again, I think a lot of it was fear. I think a lot of it was just not so much fear necessarily just of people, coming by and saying something or whatever. It was, I don't
Yeah.
think people in our church necessarily would have had a big problem with it. It was like fear of like, oh, now we've opened the door to the devil, and the devil's gonna come in and take my kids to hell or whatever. Is that more of
Okay.
that kind of fear? It got
Okay.
kind of strange at times.
Okay. Now, I have an interesting question. So, I've talked about this too before that my dad wasn't like really strict IFB, but he would have these preachers in to speak at different revival meetings or tent meetings at our church, Ruckman being one of them. We
Oh goodness.
never, yeah, we never had Hiles. Thank God. We were just never like attached to the Hiles camp, but definitely Ruckman was a big one. A couple of those kind of people. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
that's
know. It's
wild.
just crazy.
I don't really know if there's, I mean, yeah, Hiles is horrible, but Ruckman is pretty much up there. I mean, that's, oh Lord, I don't know. I mean, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah. So did your dad,
Olivia, you're just diving into the Ruckman world. So just wait,
ain't no
there's more.
way.
I mean,
Ain't no
once
way.
you dive in, you'll go down a very big rabbit hole.
Look, after the whole Lester Roloff thing, I'm gonna take like a month off of talking about anybody and going down the rabbit hole. But Ruckman is horrible, horrible.
Yeah.
Um, so with your dad being a pastor and you going to Bible college, did you get any special treatment at college, like Crown College, for being a PK kid? Because I've heard that too. That some
It
of get away with things.
it seems like there was, I believe there was a small scholarship, if I remember right. It wasn't, a whole lot, I don't think, but and I had like an academic one, which I came from a very small class. It wasn't like I was, in a class of 800 or anything. But I got a small one for that, and I think it was a small, like, $500 or something toward, for preachers' kids. As far as like the way I was treated in general, I don't remember any special treatment. Just because most of the staff didn't know my dad or anything. Clarence Sexton knew him, but they were very, very different, as far as like my dad and Clarence Sexton were nothing alike. They weren't close friends or anything. He had a lot of respect for my dad because he remembered him from those days. And if people met my dad, they were always impressed with just how real he was. He wasn't like a image kind of person, and which kind of caused him to be a recluse also. Like he sort of crawled off to himself all the time. Like he just never was really somebody, not crawled, but got off to himself more than really hanging out at a lot of big preacher conferences and things. His thing was more local revivals he'd go to, or there was this big camp meeting down in Resaca, Georgia. Called it was Sammy Allen. I don't know if you've.
Oh boy, I knew you were gonna say that.
Yes.
Don't even get me started on that man.
Oh yeah, that he would go down there, and it's like because he would just go in there. And he knew Sammy a little bit, but he would go in there and hang out. And I do remember him picking up some kind of strange stuff there. One time they had like this sign on the side of their fellowship hall that said, no women are not allowed to wear, whatever, pants, shorts. I think there might have been something else. Must be skirts and blah, blah, blah. It was like anybody could see it. A lost person could see it. And for a little while, he really got on the kick. I suspect was inspired by that. Where if people visited his church, he would like go visit them, in their home and just kind of talk a little bit more. And he even mentioned that, like said, like our church, we expect women to this and that. I'm like, even back then, I'm in the middle of, I'm just young and stupid, but I still remember thinking, wow, that just seems a little rough, to be saying that to just new people that aren't necessarily even saved,
Mm-hmm.
But
now, had you ever gone to any of those Sammy Allen meetings?
Oh yeah. Yeah, when I was a kid, I remember those things, because of course we just went to watch people act stupid, we just
it's
all the
just
running around and doing all that crazy stuff. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So can you talk about your like what was it like at Crown? I've talked for the Bible College Madness series that I did. There was quite a few people who went to Crown and told me things, but like they weren't comfortable yet, like public speaking. So I kind of have an idea. Crown was one of them. From my former church, like we talked about, like if you went there, it wasn't so much like it was like the end of the world. Like, if you say, hey, I'm going to go to Crown, most people will be like, okay, like, they go to Crown or whatever. But it was mainly like, if you don't go to Heartland, like,
right.
But Crown, I would say that because we had staff members who went to Crown. And so there was quite a few people who went to Crown in my former church. And so I've heard a lot of things about Crown. So can you talk about your experience there?
Yeah. Now, I would have to say, like off the top, like sort of a general statement. I'd say among preachers of that genre, I liked Clarence. I still have, which of course he's passed now, but I still have more respect for Clarence Sexton than many of them, just because I don't think, far to my knowledge, there was no scandals and weird hidden stuff as far as in his life or anything like that. When I went there, obviously it's a different world because Crown was very big on everything top of the line, like absolute top of the line, everything. It was nothing, which in some ways is good. It was very intense for me just because I'm a loner. I spend a lot of time alone and have since I was a kid. And it's just so many, it seemed like so many people compared to what I was used to. They were very big on you being full-time ministry. There really wasn't a lot of provision made for, the reality that most of those young people will not end up in full-time ministry, or if some of them that do probably shouldn't have. And I think that was a pressure that you sort of felt almost like you were second class if you didn't end up going into full-time ministry, and I never have. And so I'm a massive loser on that on that front. But it was very big. Obviously, the standards are very high, very very high. Strict curfews, very much. Most of you need to plan on going into full time ministry or missions or some kind of thing. Um, I met some good friends there, some of which I'm still good friends with today, but many of them have gone a similar path as myself and gotten away from a lot of that. But it wasn't all bad. It was just looking back at it, it's pretty shocking that 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 level of standard, the level of control there has lasted as long as it has. In some ways, I can't help but have a grudging respect for it, but on the other hand, I don't agree with the emphasis. So, but does that answer, or did you have like specifics?
What could you, if you can think back, maybe like three things that you look back or whatever, and you're like, kind of like, basically, what was the craziest like things that you like witnessed? One, I heard from another person that like every time certain people would walk in, everybody would have to stand up and clap, kind of like how they did with Jack Hiles at Crown. But and I also heard about Tennessee Temple or whatever, like they did
Tennessee Temple, yeah.
Yeah, they did that too. So I'm curious, did you ever have to do that?
Actually, Crown was almost, well, while I was there. I don't know before or after. For the most part, what I remember, Crown was very much against clapping, as far as for like a good song or whatever. You weren't allowed to, because that was, giving glory to man or whatever. Um, and I they never was the stand-up thing like for Clarence Sexton or anything like that, thankfully, because that would have been even weirder. But now there could have been some of that before me or after. But thankfully that wasn't something I really had to deal with too much there. As far as the applauding a particular person or that kind of thing.
How was pastoral classes at Crown? Because I've heard too that there's they focus more on what the preacher was going to be wearing than what actual.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff there. But one time I remember being in a dorm with some buddies of mine, and they were fussing and fighting over whether you should tuck your tie into the front of your pants or not, because Clarence Sexton did it in order to keep his tie from moving around while he was preaching. And so there were people that get heated over that stuff. Whether you had a Schofield reference Bible versus a regular King James, there was that argument. There were lots of things like that, as far as like double-breasted suit versus 3-button versus something else. How creased are your pants? Are your shoes polished enough? What kind of shoes are you wearing? Do you wear an undershirt under certain shirts or not? I mean, it was like there was some pretty serious division over that kind of thing. That was a lot of fun just to sit and watch.
Oh Lord.
So when you met your wife at Crown, what was her experience compared to yours? I'm sure you guys have like compared notes. Like the girls there probably were treated a little bit different and had other rules, obviously. But
Oh yeah.
has she talked to you about any of that?
Oh yeah. She now Jill is much more comfortable. Was much. She's obviously not in the IFB either, of course, now, but and I don't think she would go back to it, but she's more comfortable than I am with, like, right. For me, rules are fine in certain situations, certain places, for certain purposes, but you're going to have to make sense. I mean, I'm not going to just jump through every little hoop you come up with just because you're paranoid. And so she's more comfortable with that than I am. So she never had as much conflict, because even back then at times, one time, even with Dr. Sexton, I stood up to him because I just got irritated, because he was sort of irritable, and he came jumping out of his office and yelled something at me, because it was something to do with, I was on the grounds crew, so I was doing something outside his office, and he jumped out and yelled something, and I kind of like I kind of smarted off to him because it irritated me so bad. And that's not a strength. It's a weakness, if anything. But Jill has always been more comfortable. She's always liked strong leadership, as far as strong as in the most generic, way. And if it's not just blatantly anti-scriptural, she's like, I'm fine with it. That's fine. I mean, if that's what. So she and I are different in that regard. Things have to make. I don't like being rebellious or anything like that, but things need to make sense. I mean, if you're going to have a rule, don't just have a rule just for the sake of having a rule. And some of them up there were a little bit more that way. I know that, I mean, in a place like that with that many young people, I realize you have to have rules, a certain amount. But the girls did have very strict rules. Like, to even get off campus, they pretty much had to get a pass unless they were already like coming back from work where they had a pass and they stopped somewhere and got something. But it was very, very strict with the girls. Their curfew was 30 or 45 minutes earlier. That way we guys who were courting somebody could walk her to her. Well, we couldn't walk her to her dorm. We could walk her to like within 100 feet of it or something. Because if you got closer than that, you might be ripped into her bedroom or something and violent. But but that was about
Wow.
the extent of some of that, as far there were definitely differences in guys and
And
girls.
what was it like dating at Crown? Because I know I went to Bob Jones, and dating at Bob Jones was very old fashioned. It was like you could write notes to each other at night and have it delivered to your dormitory room, and you had special occasions where you'd dress up and you'd go, watch a play at the, it had to
Right.
be on campus, of course.
Right.
You couldn't go off campus with your boyfriend, but like definitely no holding hands, no kissing, no touching,
Oh yeah.
nothing within 6 inches of each other. So was it
Yeah.
similar?
Oh yeah. Yeah. There was definitely all that. As far as the notes, walk her to within 100 feet of her dorm. Um, I don't think that number was there. I think it was just like we were allowed to walk them to the end of this little road that was like right next to our dorm. So it was like 100, 150 feet from most of the dorms. Notes. Little on campus little activities. There was one thing called the Sadie Hawkins something or something like this, where the girls ask the guys and all this.
Yep.
There were things like that. And then like once a year, we would like go to Gatlinburg. I'd take buses to Gatlinburg, or one time it was a water park. Of course, the girls were obviously dressed in like, black nun outfits or something to keep showing any
Fully
curve.
clothed at the water
Yeah,
park.
showing it. Well, we can't have them. You can't let guys know that the girls have curves or hips. So it was very, very modest in that regard. Stuff like that. There were off-campus activities as long as they were heavily, chaperoned,
That's so crazy because, like, with Heartland, even though I did not go, I went down for a week, um, because like basically all the seniors had to go. AK, it was me. There were like four of us, who went, and I really went just to go see my brother and then a couple other friends that had went down there. And right off the bat, they're like, "Have you been around the circle?" And I was like, "What the crap is a circle? What does that even mean? Like, you guys have to tell me. Like, what is that?" And they're like, "Oh, just wait till 7:30." I'm like, "Okay." Like, I don't know what to expect. I'm thinking, okay, this place is already weird. Like within like I think like the first day I was like, yeah, this is not for me, but I'm just gonna go along with it. And literally at 7:30 on certain nights throughout the week, you would have couples, and it was this big circle. I bet there's a photo. And there's a circle, and people just walk it that are couples because you can't touch. So you just
Right.
and it's so awkward. Like you would be like and you have to walk through it to get to the girls' dorm where I was at. And I'm like, I'm over here hearing multiple conversations that are so cringeworthy. I'm thinking, what's wrong? Then you have the awkward couples that are in the dining hall that are staring so
Oh,
seductively. It's just
that's
so
the worst. That's the
oh,
worst.
so bad. And I'll never forget one of the girls who, oh God, Oh, bless her heart. She's like, you need to lay out your clothes, and I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, because if there's a fire, you have to make sure your skirt goes on. I said, I am not putting no skirt over some pajama pants. I'm running. I was like, I'm not even a student here. Like, I'm just here to visit, you know? And so I just was like, this is insane. There was so many things that were insane. But props to you guys being able to go to the water park. I mean, heck, we went water rafting
Right.
one year in youth, and we I used to have a picture on my phone. I don't think I have anymore. We had to wear a bathing suit, like, you know, whatever. And then we wore black culottes because they looked like basketball shorts. So it's like what we wore,
Right.
you know. So we wore black culottes and then a shirt, and the shirt though had to be bigger, so like, you know, oversized t-shirt, because when you're wet it can't stick to you. It was so stupid. And then water shoes, obviously.
Yeah, I mean it, and it really though it touches on the idea that lack of opportunity. It's like there's a real confusion or a conflation with character and lack of opportunity. I mean, you can lock up some kid in a room somewhere and never let him see the opposite sex, never let him touch alcohol or tobacco or whatever else of all the evil things that are on the list. But that doesn't mean that kid has character. It just means he doesn't have opportunity. So it's like this idea that you can like keep the boys from ever seeing a girl, you know, or like, and somehow that means that they're going to be good young men, or going to be moral young men, or going to be young men that respect women and don't think it's about them, and you know, and being abusive or demanding to their wives one day or whatever. And it's like you're not teaching them that. You're just hiding things from them, and then that's not the same as them having character, you know, and integrity, you know.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, it's true.
Exactly. I mean, like I said before, my ex-husband went to Crown, and he has a porn addiction. I
Yeah.
mean, so, and a lot of these guys that grew up IFB, and it's like you have these strict rules and you're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that. But it's like you said, if they don't have the character, they're just going to have the opportunity eventually when they become adults and they get out of, under their parents' roof or under, the Bible college rules, and they're going to do what they want. And a lot of these guys, I mean, I think that's where a lot of these scandals come from. These guys are just pent up, and they never were like truly good people because they didn't have the character, but they just were waiting for opportunities.
Right.
And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, because once a young man who hasn't been taught reality and how to deal with the world around him, I mean, you're making a potential monster, because you know the sex drive or all those things is a good healthy thing, but it can also be perverted and be, you know, that's how you get rapists and molesters and people like this, because you've never taught them to deal with natural urges in the right in healthy ways. You know, you've just tried to prevent temptation in the sense of just like they have no idea what a woman's body looks like. I mean, for all they know, it could be a lizard under there. You know, just I mean, it could be whatever. I mean, you know, just because you're not teaching them, you're not teaching them this is reality, this is the world we live in, and this is how you can deal with it. And
Right.
it's never okay to. It's not a it's never okay to, for instance, abuse a woman or a child or whatever. And you're not teaching them that stuff. You're just teaching them everything is evil, everything is sin. It's almost like a Gnostic kind of way of looking at everything is evil. Everything outside of our little echo chamber is evil and sinful, and all this. And so people just have no way of coping with reality once they get out into the real world.
Right. I think that in and of itself is an interesting discussion. Um, just yeah, that's just very interesting what you just said, because I think there's so much emphasis. I mean, even, obviously I'm a female, so there was so much emphasis on us, like the purity culture, of it. And, you gotta wait till marriage, and you can't do this. And, sex is bad outside of marriage. And then you get there on your wedding night and you're terrified. You're like, I don't know what to do. He doesn't know what to do. Like, nobody knows what to do. Like, it's not, it's not healthy. It's not. I mean, it's just not
Yeah.
healthy. And so it causes a lot of problems in people's marriages and, within the IFB churches. And I'm not just saying just IFB, but because of the sake of this podcast, we are talking about IFB. So I know people get mad. I try to use that disclaimer often. Like, it's not just IFB, everybody, and it's not all IFB churches, but we're just talking about the majority of, our experiences and other IFB churches that we've experienced. And that's just the reality of it. And unfortunately, they really make it like hard for people when they do get married to have a healthy like sex life with their spouse. I mean, it's it's a discussion that is not had often. I will say that.
Right. And the IFB, with the ideas that are propagated, now with all this huge stink going on, which that's the NIFB, the Steven Anderson mess going on right
Oh
now.
my God.
Interesting in and of itself. But that the thing is, the IFB has picked at people for years, bullied groups of people, bullied anyone who was outside of it, bullied anyone who was inside it that didn't toe the line. And then when people push back, all of a sudden it's screaming victim. And they've done this to themselves, and I wouldn't say I'm angry at the IFB, but I have no use for it. I just don't.
Mhm.
I don't get into the whole like, oh, it's my heritage is whatever. I don't care. I'm not after heritage. I'm after truth. And if it means,
Mhm.
every IFB person on the planet hates me, then I'm going to sleep just as good tonight as last night. So,
Amen.
yeah.
Oh
Amen.
yeah,
I
that's just
agree.
what Elise said last night on our recording. Because we're in the middle of Lester Roloff series, and Jen, you actually this stuck with me last night because I was like, that is so true. Some guy, I don't even know. Maybe it's a guy. I mean, assuming a guy because of the username, but I don't know. Um, they totally dismissed the whole episode and all they cared about. They like this guy was so whole like just appalled about my Walmart comment. Well, let me tell you, 90% of the IFB churches I've been to, they have that mindset that if you see somebody in Walmart walking around either half naked in their eyes, I don't even know, like, I mean, heck, I guess I'm wearing half naked because I wear shorts and stuff, but like, and they're
Oh,
like, oh, well, yeah, they're just like, oh, well, that, they judge. Like, that is an actual, like, I can't tell you how many times I heard that. And then the guy's like, oh, write down all the pastor names. I'm thinking, I don't have time for that. I'm here to
Yeah.
expose what I know.
Right.
Good for you for never hearing that. But there is that mindset, and it's always the woman's fault, and it's so annoying. But I'm like, you totally just like if that is what you're upset about, you totally missed the whole purpose of this because you should be mad about the comments that Lester Roloff said, the corporal punishment that he believed in, and the discipline and all. I mean, like he's a lunatic. Like, well, he was because he died, but I'm saying he's a lunatic, and that's all you care about.
yeah.
My Walmart comment, because I even clicked on it.
Right.
I was like, what is this you talking about? And I was like, of course, it's something I said. Okay, fair enough. And then I was like, well, I mean, I've heard that. Like, I can't tell you how many times, or like even you have Jack Hiles talking about if there was a guy that got in trouble with rape, there's a half naked girl next to him in the cell. I'm thinking, no, that makes like
Right.
that just shows how extreme. So when people are saying that, like, I'm like, well, I sleep like a baby because you don't really know me and I really don't care. I'm not going to lose my sleep. I have tough skin. I really do. And I just feel bad for the people who are conditioned to not have tough skin. And, we talked about this last night, Jenny, about the people pleasing type of thing. I was to a certain extent, like, yeah, okay, sure. But also you're not going to force me to do something I'm not going to. Like I was that kid in the youth. I was the kid who talked back, who questioned things because I genuinely was confused. I'm thinking if I always say if you're going to come out and say something, better have facts to prove it. If not, then that's just your opinion, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. But when I question your opinion, it's like, oh, she's this disrespectful teenager. I can't tell you how many times parents there are some really good friends of mine who literally have apologized and said, throughout the years, I judged you as a teenager, and to see like where I'm at now or whatever, I was very wrong about you. I'm like, I like hearing that. I like hearing
Yeah.
I like it.
I've gotten that myself. So it's interesting when you get that apology. But I have a question about Steven Anderson and the
Oh,
NIFB.
girl, don't even. Not today to
Well,
bring up that man.
I just have a question about this.
He's a
Okay.
lunatic.
Huh?
He is
Well, I know
a
he's a lunatic. Yeah, I know that. I know that. I mean, the guy calls abuse spousal discipline.
Yeah.
Like you can spank your wife. Like I just, it's crazy. But so my question is, was the IFB not extreme enough for these people? Like, how did this whole movement start?
Well, I know Anderson is considered the founder of it, but yeah, I think what it was they thought there was too much compromise in the IFB. From what I understand,
Yep.
there was too much. There were too many IFB preachers or whatever who were starting to kind of be like, okay, this is a little much, so we're going to back off on this particular thing, and they wanted to be the people that go down in history as the last man standing or whatever. And
Okay.
that's what I understand of
I
it.
mean,
I
yeah.
never got
Let's say
crazy
I
into
looked
it.
up. Yeah, I went down that rabbit hole just because I was like, new IFB. I'm thinking, no, I want to get rid of the IFB. I don't want a new one. Like I'm trying to get rid of it.
Well, when I heard of it, I thought it was like people in the IFB who were like, okay, we need like to reform the IFB because it's definitely like, turning people off. That's what I thought. I thought it was like a good thing. And then I saw a video of Steven Anderson and I was like, what?
Yeah, well, Steven
What?
Anderson, he had one
went
job.
to Hiles. He went to literally Hiles Anderson and was a dropout, and then have the audacity. I'm telling you, that man irks my soul. I feel so bad for anyone who ever relatively was even near him, because I'm telling you, I would punch him in the face. And I know that's not Christ-like, but I would punch him in the face. He literally said that Jack Hiles was too liberal.
Oh, wow.
How can Jack Hiles be too liberal? Like, what?
Well, the bottom line though with that goober is that okay, Stephen, if that's your real name, you had one job to do. You were going to reform something, and you did, and you reformed everything but what needed to be reformed. You just brought more of the trash in. I mean, oh, okay, if your wife, y'all can edit this out if you need to, but if your wife likes to be spanked, good for her, whatever.
Right.
But that ain't what was happening. I mean,
Right.
he was spanking her, but it wasn't like, they were in there, oh, honey, hit me harder kind of thing.
Right.
You were
He
in
was
there
beating her.
slapping your wife around with a belt or whatever it was, or electrical cord.
Electrical cord, yeah. And
Yeah.
your son and daughter recorded the phone conversation with that. Did you see that with the other pastor? Have you seen it?
Are we
Oh,
talking
which
about
one?
Steven Anderson?
So
His
Steven
daughter?
Anderson, yes. So Steven Anderson's son actually just came
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Yeah. And he filmed, like, he's like driving in the video, and literally he's talking with his dad's pastor's friend, and he literally says, well, I don't really see anything wrong, because like that's not, I'm thinking, when is this going to stop of the whole, well, that's not my relationship, that's not my person, that's whatever. Like, and I've seen this firsthand with also pastors saying, well, like, technically if the parents don't want to press charges or something like that, then it is what it is, like whatever. No, pastors are mandated like reporters. Like, I'm tired of that. Just because the parents don't want to, like, no, about it.
And it's just become increasingly rapey. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah.
It's just getting rapey. I mean, it's been rapey. So I mean, I don't miss the IFB. There's nothing about it that I ever plan to go back to. I'm not angry. I don't think about it all the time or anything. I just, when I do, I get a little claustrophobic, whenever to think about some of what went on, but.
So where are you now in your spiritual journey? Are you still going to church anywhere? Are you still a Christian? Consider yourself a Christian?
Yes, I actually pastor a small church.
Oh.
But as far as where I am and all that, obviously, of course, a Christian, but I would consider myself more of like a Bible church, perhaps, or maybe even non-denominational. I mean, that whole Baptist heritage nonsense where, what is the Trail of Blood or whatever. Remember that little booklet? Did you ever read that? Stuff like that's just so much nonsense, because it's all about building, so that we're proud to be Baptist. And it comes down to control. If you can make people feel like that they're not really a Christian outside of a particular group, then people are going to stick around. And you can just keep telling them, well, you've got to be here if you're going to be right with God. And then since you're here, we're going to tell you how you have to live in order to be here. And it's just, in fact, several years after, of course, this is a little more tough to talk about, but a few years after Crown, Jill and I split up for a lot of years. My fault, not hers. I mean, it was just, looking back, I can see some of the stuff that I let cause it still on me. I'm not blaming anyone else, and a lot of it was the expectation of, we are the true Christians. Everyone else is kind of, they may be saved, but barely, kind of thing. Or they may be Christians, but they don't really love the Lord, that kind of thing. And I don't know that I followed all that to that extent, but over the years, I just started getting just disillusioned with it. But then I was under the impression at the time that there was no Bible Christianity outside of that, So when I walked away from the Lord, it wasn't really that I was angry at the Lord. I just didn't know what else to do, because I knew I couldn't be what I was expected to be. And had some run-ins, with an IFB pastor that I had at the time. And I, got out of church, got away from the Lord, lost my family for a lot of years. And it was just, it's still my fault. It's not the IFB's fault, but I can see where the IFB played a part, in just getting you to that place. Because if you can't give me clear biblical evidence for it, quit putting it on me as an expectation. And that was never going to stop. And so I got away from the Lord, and a lot of regrets and a lot of, I call them the lost years. But a lot of that went back to the expectation, and the idea that this is Bible Christianity. There is none outside of this,
Yeah, and I think it goes back to just that mindset of so like my former church, I've said this on, oh well, I know it'll be eventually on season 2. Like, they truly believe like that Lighthouse Baptist Church is going to be in heaven. Like, they think that's going to be and it's like, where do you get that idea? Like, they really do. Jen laughs at that, but I promise you, I'm telling you, it's true. They really think that. And so it's just like, okay, for example, and I will say this because I don't care, like, it legit happened to me, or not me, but my mother, and she will approve of this. So when my parents got divorced, shut up, Jen, stop laughing. And when we went back to the church, and keep in mind, my dad never went back after the divorce, so like, was never there. But my mom went, and she was talking to my former pastor, and he was like, like, how's Tim doing? And she's like, I don't know. We're divorced. Like, I mean, he's a lunatic, but, type of that. And he's like, do you know if he's in church at all? And my mom was like, yeah, he actually goes to, oh gosh, what is it called? I know the pastor. Crap. Cause I know people who listen to this go there. Crap, what is it? That makes me so mad. I know the pastor, but she's like, he goes to John Ray's church, and literally my former pastor looked at my mom and goes, then he's not really in church.
Oh wow.
And
that's what I'm talking about, though. Yeah.
Thinking, and like, my mom says still to this day, like, if she was here right now, she would probably pop in on this recording, but yup. She still to this day, she's like, that still like baffles my mind. Like, and he technically is an IFB church now. Granted, I mean, we went there a little bit before my parents got split, so I know the church and stuff like that. And I don't really think he's really an IFB pastor. Like, I mean, like, they do like the hymns, and like the girls wear stuff like that, but like, teenagers, we were allowed to, like, they were wearing shorts there, and I kept on saying, wow, yeah, Lighthouse would have never done this, type thing. So I don't even, and that, I think that just shows how, some of them are IFB, but they're so laid back, and then you have the extreme, and that's why me and Jen always keep on, I think, reassuring, like, not all IFB, because I think that would be a little too far-fetched to say that they're all like that. But that mindset, like, oh, and I remember my mom still to this day, I mean, that is just something that is stuck in her brain, like, or for example, like, there was a family that had left, she'll get a kick out of this. Gabby's family, obviously left after the whole Circle of Hope and other things that transpired. And I remember one year, oh Lord, I remember, it was my freshman year. I was like freshly back into it. And I remember somebody had brought up one of her sisters on the bus. And they were like, oh, I wonder what she's up to or whatever. And I was like, oh, she actually has a kid. She looks like she's thriving and, all that. And I was like, but I don't know if they still go to John Ray's church, actually, because they went there for a while. And I remember my youth pastor having the audacity to say, well, if you don't really go here, you're not really in God's church. And I remember thinking, man, so if I leave here, I'm really not going to be in God's church. I'm not, what I mean? Like, that fear and mindset is so dangerous. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, these teachings can be dangerous to one's walk with God. And like you said, when you got out, like, yeah, there was a lot of things that had transpired, but I mean, that mindset that they're better, they're the right Christians, they're the ones who are going to be in heaven. It goes back to my Walmart comment, and I stand on that. It's really very damaging. Definitely also for new Christians who come in there thinking that, oh, these people are godly people, right? They're getting, oh, I guess that's true, whatever. And then they get burned out, and then eventually they just fall and they don't have a relationship with God anymore. And we see it time and time and time, and it's just a nasty pattern. But yeah, I mean, that's just something my mom's always, still to this day, it baffles her that my former pastor, and I know for a fact that there's probably other comments that were made like that, even when staff members, exit really quietly out of the church because they're going to go start their own church. But that's just
that Walmart thing, though. That's very true. Like, like I remember.
I know it is. I'm telling you, when if I say something, I'm backing up. I'm going to find a clip. I'm going to find a clip of an ISB pastor saying it.
Right. Yeah, I heard that growing up a lot, stuff like that, and people sneaking around. That's why I like, but then again, it really comes down to, are you really pastoring or serving, or whether you're man, woman, or whatever, young person. There's a song that really, I'm trying to think of the guy. I think it's Zach Williams, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Only Jesus. Yeah, I can't remember if it's him or not. It might be one of the other groups. It might be Casting Crown or something. I don't know. But anyway, I'm getting two or three songs mixed up. But there's one called There Was Jesus, or Only Jesus, rather. And if more pastors truly had that mentality, you wouldn't have people trying to scare people into staying in their movement and staying in their church and staying in their this and that. And when I came out here to this little church and they, voted and wanted me to be their pastor, that was something that has been a goal of mine from the beginning. And I've told them this. Like, I share my struggles with them. Like, they know I'm not perfect, and they know, like, I'll tell them, I'm like, I have a problem with this particular type of believing in God. I mean, I try to just be as transparent as I can be. But I've told my people, I'm like, I'm not trying to make you my disciple. I don't need you to agree with me on everything. I mean, I understand if I tell you, and I've made a promise to them, if it's my personal opinion, I'll tell you it's my personal opinion. It'll be hopefully an educated opinion, but it's not going to carry authority just because it's my opinion. If you go to another church and that's where you serve the Lord, that I have to be okay with that, because it's about the bigger picture. It's not about my own little, kingdom that I'm hoping to build. And you got people like Steven Anderson, like a cornered rat. He just, it's that pride and that arrogance and that what I've built that's become the big thing, that's become the focus. Jack Howell's obviously the same way, but we got to stay out of the whole ego thing. Somehow we got to separate ego from ministry, somehow.
Right. But, yeah, I mean, it's time and time and again, like, what Jen and I have been talking with so many people, the idolization of these people. Like, yes, we are supposed to look at a pastor differently because that is like the biblical standpoint, but not too much where you're literally, when he walks in, you're clapping, you're throwing money at him. I mean, Jack Howell's 40th anniversary was insane. Like, that video is insane watching it. And people just thinking, I mean, like Jen, we even said, there's going to be people with this Lester Roloff series who still believe he's just godly man, right? And it's just like, no.
Yeah, and I've got to listen to your episodes on that because, like, I grew up hearing his name, of course. Like, my parents knew a lot about him and stuff, but I never have looked into his ministry. I have heard that it's kind of got some weird undertone or something, yeah, but I've never looked into it enough to. I'll take your word for it, but I'll have to listen to your episodes on that.
Yeah, buckle up. We just
yeah. It's pretty horrific stuff. But so I have a question. For those who are listening who are still in the IFB, if you could give them kind of a word of advice, if they're sort of like on the fence, they're like, well, I've been IFB my whole life, like they're seeing kind of through, the curtain and seeing the reality of it, but they're just not sure if they can leave. What could they do? Where would they go? What kind of advice would you give somebody that's listening that's still in one of those kind of churches?
That's a great question, Jen, and I'm going to try to answer it in less than 3 minutes.
I know, right? It's loaded question.
I'll try to be as brief as I can be, but if I could tell anyone who's in the IFB, if I could talk to myself when I was still there. For one, you have to already purpose in your heart. You're going to be honest with yourself. You're going to be honest. And you have to ask yourself, what is the most important thing to me? Is the most important thing to me a comfort zone? Is the most important thing to me to feel like I'm in some sort of shell in the IFB that is going to protect me from everything? Or is it most important to me to know the absolute truth on everything, on anything and everything? Because the day that truth means more to you, than your friends and your comfort zones, than your pastor's opinion, than your fear of repercussions, than all the reasons that you give for staying in it. If the day that the truth becomes more important to you is the day that you'll never be satisfied in the IFB again. I had to get to a point where the good that God brought out of all the evil in those years that I was away from the Lord, the good that came out of that was that everything was torn away, stripped away. There was nothing left. As far as I knew, I'd already blown their expectations. I was too far gone for most of those people to even mess with. So I was free of them. And so when the Lord began working in my heart and showing me, started pulling Jill and I back to a place where we could begin talking about whether we could ever, repair our marriage and things like that. And then there became such a hunger for truth that has never let go of me since. And so it doesn't matter to me who agrees, or I don't say that to be a tough guy. I don't waste time trying to be a tough guy. If I've got to be a tough guy, I'll be a tough guy. But this isn't about being a tough guy. This is about realizing you have got to prioritize truth above your relationships in the IFB or with the IFB. And for me, doctrinal truth has always been so intriguing anyway. And when I started realizing there were so many things that I had assumed were true, both in what God expected and what Scripture was teaching, there were so many discrepancies with the IFB with those things that I was like, there is no way I can ever go back there, because now I don't go around snapping at people and trying to, tell them, you, by the way, did you know you suck doctrinally? I mean, come on. I don't do that. But as far as like, even though I think some of them do, but it's about knowing the truth, and that makes you free. And I wish the IFB needs to die. I don't know that it will, but it needs to. That's not to say there shouldn't be any such thing as an independent fundamental Baptist church.
Right.
Oh, but for a denomination that pretends to be independent, they are terrified of each other. I mean, they're more scared of each other than any Southern Baptist church is of another Southern Baptist church. I mean, they're scared to death of who's going to tell on who and who's going to tell this person that, oh, I heard you were talking to that preacher from such and such church, so now we can't have you, and we're going to make sure nobody else ever. Come on, I mean, are you independent or are you not? You know, but yep. I got sidetracked. But yes, that would be my advice to them, because, and when that truth grips you, and you begin seeing things in Scripture, then you will never be satisfied there again. You'll have to leave. You'll have to choose one or the other, most likely. There could be exceptions in churches like that. There could be. I'm sure there are independent churches that would be perfectly fine. But if that's the case, then you're probably not worried about leaving the IFB anyways. If you're thinking about leaving the IFB, it's probably because your church is one of those churches that is honestly kind of crazy a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, perfectly well said.
For them to blur the lines enough between gossip and the exposure of corruption, they blur those lines so that they can use it either way they want. Well, if they're actually gossiping, it's, well, we're just, you know, it's either prayer request or expose, you know, we're talking about, you know, important issues that may have to be dealt with. But then somebody talks about what's actually going on, and it's they're gossiping, they're trying to destroy people's ministries and lives and all this stuff. And it's like, no, you sack of trash. You were the one who did this. You did it. No one else did it to you. No one forced you to it. You did it. And so don't get mad when you get found out. You know, that's just the way that's the way this thing works, you know.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, and there's obviously things in this world that we will never know until obviously we stand in front of God, and I've said that too, that unfortunately there's so many people walking around, not even just pastors, you know, just nasty pedophiles that we'll never know, you know what I mean? But if you bet yourself that if there's a scandal, I will expose you, and I have no problem doing it. I always tell people too. People will message me like, "Hey, look up in this or whatever, and you should cover this." All right, if there's proof and there's actual, you know, whatever, I have no problem. John, what would you say to? I'm gonna actually take Jen's question, but I'm not gonna do it in the way that you do. What would you say to yourself that when you were going through a hard time, okay, after Crown, and you know, you and Jill kind of split up or whatever, what would you say to that version of John now, where you're at in your life? What would you say to him?
Not to do the things I did. I think I would tell myself, Jesus doesn't need the IFB to love you. Because that would have been, if I could have understood that, then the other things wouldn't have happened. I was very, very wild, very immoral. Drank enough probably to float a small ship. Smoked enough weed to fill the back of a Chevy Impala. But I think that's what I would tell myself, is that you've misunderstood Jesus Christ. And not in the sense of like I wasn't saved, but in the sense of understanding him. Like Paul said, to know him. I mean, I wouldn't then I wouldn't have felt like to get away from to leave an IFB church was automatically leaving God. I think that's some version of that, I think, is what I would have told myself. And I think it would have saved me years of a lot of things that were in my daughter's lives. And I, you know, could have spent some of my strongest years with my dear wife, and just save myself a lot of problems. More importantly, save them a lot of problems. if I could have understood that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
think
I
that's
I say for me, I appreciate that the accountability. You're willing to come on here and say, you know what, like it was my fault, the this and this and that. And like you said, I don't really want to blame the IFB, but they did have a part in it or whatever type of thing, because if you wouldn't have gotten taught that or been used to that programming, you wouldn't have done the things that you did. And it's unfortunate. And I'm glad though that you were able to unfortunately go through that, but it looks like, it sounds like you went through that though to, land where you're at now. And it's awesome that you're a pastor and you can be real. You can be honest, because at the end of the day, that's what God wants. He don't like liars who stand up on the pew and act like they've never done anything in their life, but then go home and beat their wife or watch child pornography. You have you who says, you know what? Yeah, I went to Bible college. I got out. Like you said, you could have drunk and filled up a whole ship and marijuana with a trunk of it. Kind of funny. But not to, get in that one. But for I like that realness, because when I went back to church, and I go to a non-denomination church, I've told Jen this and on other things, when on Easter, and when he took that jacket off and he was like, "This is what I struggle with," and it was anxiety, depression, all of this, I was like, "That's realness."
Right.
You are a sinner just like me, and I appreciate that. And I feel like if we had more pastors like that, we would not be having the rate of atheists and agnostic. And I firmly believe that most atheists now were once believers.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
And some, I think, deep down probably still are. They're just so hurt and angry, a lot of them. I don't know everyone's heart, obviously, but yeah, it's I think that's the speaking of, like we was talking about some bad stuff, and that's something I had to tell. I wanted to make sure I wanted to make sure to tell my church family, that, on one hand, we all struggle, and we have to understand that we all have struggles. But I said, but you have to understand, if I ever find out any of you are acting inappropriate with children or with whatever, you better hope the cops get to you before I do, because we're not doing that here. I said, I will not cover up for any of you at all, at any point. But to understand that it's part of our human experience to have struggles. I'd be lying if I said I'd never have to deny myself when it comes to lust or to wasted time or laziness or whatever. I mean, there's, I think pastors and we're talking IFB, and by the way, the whole thing, like, well, when you expose IFB issues, and then people say, yeah, but the Catholics are like that too. Okay, well, it isn't an either or. It can be going on in both places, but just because I'm speaking out over here doesn't mean I don't acknowledge the fact that there's problems elsewhere. But you got to deal with the issues that you can deal with, and so I think it's great that you are doing that. But
yeah, I recently saw a clip actually that you mentioned that. I don't know if it was Kingsbury or who it was, but somebody said from the pulpit, or somebody defending him. I think it was a smaller church, but he actually made that comment. Oh, yeah, the Catholic Church and this and that. He goes, well, so what if the IFB has a few scandals here and there? I think this is the safest place to be for your kids is in an IFB church. It's like, what? Like,
except the part
just
where it's
the logic. It's like, it's insane.
I'm
well,
telling you, I think they all believe that their churches are going to be like, they're going to have little cul-de-sacs and all the churches are going to be in heaven. Like, that's not, no.
is that like
I'm telling you, that's a legit mindset. They think that their church, kind of like how Mormons believe that there's different levels of the kingdom. This one's bad, and then you work a little bit harder, but if you don't drink and all this stuff, then you're like high. IFB believe that, but they just believe that their church is going to be planted like little cul-de-sacs, like it's like a neighborhood. I don't understand.
right? And I think some of that, I'm moving my phone a little bit. I think some of that also is some of the Baptist bride types that are like, I don't know if you're messed with any of that or looked at any of that.
Yes, I have. I'm familiar with that. Yep.
Yeah. I think some of those churches believe weird stuff like that. Like, like your particular actual church, your congregation is going to be sitting up in heaven, like like the only church is a local church kind of thing. So all these local churches are just going to show up in heaven or something. It's typical. It's kind of typical of the IFB though, that even logically, they don't think things all the way through logically with like the King James only issue. It's like, okay, if you sit and think about language and how translation works and these different things, right, your King James only movement is going to die overnight. I mean, it just, not only is it factually, historically wrong, it is logically bankrupt. And so a lot of views like these churches that are going to show up in heaven is just, it's obsession over nonsense. It's just, when there's so much.
They think that there's going to be, the King James Bible is going to be sitting next to God on the throne. Like legitimately, they think it's going to be, the King James Bible is going to be up there.
Well, yeah. I really hope it's ESV or NIV so I can be like, see ya. I read that version.
I'm an ESV guy myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm literally right next to me, ESV, which this is an insider joke of my brother. Shout out to Mason. I literally kept on telling him, I don't understand KJV. He's the one who went to Heartland for a little bit. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm telling you right now, I don't understand it. I'm not walking around talking about thou shalt. I'm not doing that. I know that's like the Ten Commandments, but I'm not doing that. I don't understand it. And he was like, okay, like it was like a joke. And on Christmas morning, I was opening up like the box and I see this blue thing. And I was like, what is this? He was like, here's the ESV. It's English Standard Version of the King James Version. Yeah. Let me know if you understand it. And I was like, oh, you think you're funny. And then I started deep diving. I was like, this is so much better. Thank you. So it was his way of, he's thinking he's being funny, but kind of helped me in the long run so I can understand the Bible better. Well, to finish up this episode, what would you say to a pastor who's watching this, who has these mindsets and watching this in the way of maybe trying to have an educational point of view or trying to be open-minded? I mean, I don't really know if that's possible in the IFB because, you can't be open-minded. But if there is a pastor watching this that is like noticing the cracks, maybe a newer pastor and they're like, I don't know if I like this or whatever. What would you say to them as a, pastor point of view?
What would I say to a pastor that I might once again ask him to examine himself and say, where is my faith? Is my faith in a system? Am I scared to death to leave that system because if I leave that system, I lose Christ or I'm further from Christ? Or is my faith in Christ himself? If it's in Christ himself and you've asked the Lord and you've asked him, Lord, please keep me from falling, lead me into truth. He's not going to just let you just wander off into all kinds of error. It's like people are just terrified to really, and I say this because my dad it seems like this. It's like they've gotten so entrenched in their system that it's like, okay, are you trusting your system? If you're trusting your system, I get why you're so scared at the idea of deviating from it at all. Whereas if your faith is in Christ and God's word, a lot of other things will fade in significance, and you'll understand my idea of faith. To stop looking at faithfulness to the IFB or whatever as being faithfulness to God. It's not one and the same. I guess it could be if your particular church was, I'm kind of getting off on a rabbit trail there, but a lot of times it's like we're afraid to leave a system. We're afraid to question the system. We're afraid that if we do that, then we're somehow compromising. We're fixing to head down a slippery slope of horror and all these things. And it's like, no, I'm not looking to a system to keep me on track. I don't need all the guardrails that I can make up myself. I want to know, where are the boundaries that Scripture sets? I don't care about myself. I don't need a system. I don't need 50 other preachers propping me up and telling me you're doing it right, brother. You just hang in there and stay with the stuff and all the lines that they come up with about never deviating from the IFB style way of doing things. I don't need that. I have God. I mean, I don't mean to sound snide about it, but I have scripture. And if once we understand that it's not about that system, it's kind of like I was telling Jen earlier. Once you get that, then I don't think you'll certainly never need the IFB again. And you probably won't even stay in it, most likely. But I think that would be it. Examining, is your faith in a system, or is it truly in the God of the Bible,
Yeah. And I think that's perfectly well said. Jen, do you have any questions?
No, this was a amazing discussion. I thought,
Look, I told you,
it
I was like,
very
look, I was
interesting.
like, I know it's gonna be good because we.
Yeah.
I have really enjoyed it. I appreciate y'all inviting me. I've enjoyed it. Maybe one day I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to call you. How's that?
Yeah, sounds
Oh,
great. I mean, yeah, probably put a fair warning. Who knows what the topic will be, but I like to share my opinions, obviously. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much for being on today's episode and speaking with us, and having this open discussion and talking about your experience and the hardships that you went through after Crown College. And it's great to see though people thriving definitely in their walk with God. It's unfortunate when we have people on that have deconstructed or whatever. So it is refreshing for Jen and I to know that even though it was very hard to go through emotional, spiritual, all the things, to know that where you're at now in life. And so and who knows, maybe if we're ever in Missouri or whatever, who knows? Or right, it's Missouri, right?
Yeah, come on by. We'll pin the dogs up and pour you some sweet tea.
I love it.
Thank you so much.